Windsor Great Park has survived a great many things. The Black Death passed through the surrounding villages in 1349 and left the oak standing. The Civil War came and went. 2 world wars requisitioned the land, plowed under sections of it, handed it back in worse shape, and the meadow still came back the following spring as if nothing had happened, which, botanically speaking, it hadn't. Dutch elm disease took the elms. A drought in 1976 browned everything to the color of old envelopes. A storm in 1987 dropped 15 million trees across southern England in a single night. The meadow survived all of it. What it had not, in 800 years of continuous existence, been required to survive, until roughly the invention of the front-facing camera, was the sustained, enthusiastic, and profoundly well-intentioned assault of the British day tripper in peak wildflower season. This is that story. The meadow sits inside a section of Windsor Great Park designated as a site of special scientific interest. There are signs, several of them. Large ones with laminated text, printed in both Arial and a slightly more aggressive Arial bold for the bullet points, which specify clearly and without ambiguity that visitors are to remain on the footpath, that picking, trampling, photographing from within, or otherwise disturbing the flora is prohibited under the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, and that violations carry a fine of up to £2,500. The signs have been there since 1993. They have been read by approximately everyone. They have been heeded by approximately no one who thought their particular reason didn't count as a violation, which is, as of the date of this filming, approximately everyone. On this particular Tuesday in late May, the meadow was doing what the meadow does in late May. The oxeye daisies were up. The common spotted orchids were 3 days from peak. The yellow rattle was doing its quiet, parasitic work on the grass roots, which is how you keep a wildflower meadow healthy. You let the yellow rattle bully the grass into submission so everything else has room. And if you don't know what yellow rattle is, that is fine. That is exactly fine. You are in good company. You are in the company of every single person who walked into this meadow today confident they were doing it no harm. At the eastern edge of the footpath, on a wooden bench that is technically still within the permitted zone, a boy sat with a sketchbook. He was perhaps 10, small for his age or average, it was hard to tell. He wore a navy jumper with the sleeves pushed up, and he was holding a 4B pencil with the particular grip of someone who had been taught to hold a pencil correctly, and had then developed their own grip anyway. The sketchbook was open to a fresh page. On the page, in careful, observational lines that were better than they had any right to be for someone his age, was the beginning of a common spotted orchid. He was not looking at his phone. He was not narrating to a camera. He was looking at the flower, and then at the page, and then at the flower again, with the focused, unhurried attention of a person who had somewhere better to be and had chosen, consciously, not to go there. 30 feet behind him, half hidden by a stand of hawthorn in a way that suggested professional training rather than coincidence, a man in plain clothes watched the car park. Nobody paid either of them any attention. This was about to become the most expensive mistake of several people's afternoon. The first one arrived at 11:17. She was, by all visible indicators, a reasonable person. Sensible walking shoes, a canvas tote bag from the Tate Modern, which signals a certain kind of cultural self-image. She had a proper camera, not a phone, an actual camera with a lens that cost more than some people's rent. And she stood at the sign for a full 30 seconds reading it, which is 28 seconds longer than most people manage. Then she stepped off the path. Not far, just to the edge, just to get the angle, just because the light was hitting the oxeye daisies in a way that the path simply did not accommodate. And she was a photographer. She had a photographer's eye. She could see what the shot needed. And what the shot needed was for her to be standing approximately 1 meter inside the boundary of a protected ecosystem. She got her shot. The boy glanced up, looked at her, looked back at his sketchbook. She left without incident, which is the most dangerous outcome, because she would now tell 7 people that you can just step in a little. It's fine, nobody says anything. The second one was a man with a spaniel. The spaniel was on a lead, which he would like you to know, and he felt this was relevant, which it was not, because the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 does not contain a, but the dog was on a lead exemption. And if it did, the spaniel would have immediately invalidated it by lunging at a patch of common spotted orchids with the focused malevolence of an animal that has waited its entire life for exactly this opportunity. Oscar, Oscar, leave it, Oscar. Oscar did not leave it. The man hauled Oscar back onto the path with the expression of someone who was very sorry, but also felt that the orchid had provoked the situation. The boy did not look up this time. Third, a family of 4. The parents were on their phones, not photographing the meadow, just on their phones. The meadow was incidental to whatever was happening on their phones. And their 2 children, aged approximately 6 and 8, had identified the wildflower meadow as a running track and were using it as one, which is exactly as damaging to a load-bearing wildflower root system as it sounds. Jaden, Jaden, don't Jaden, there are flowers, Jaden. Jaden was not moved by the existence of flowers. The man in the hawthorn took a step forward. The parents looked up from their phones. The children were retrieved. The family moved on, and the mother gave the sign a look of genuine betrayal, as though the sign had failed to prevent her children from doing this, which is, in a narrow technical sense, accurate. The boy had not looked up once during any of this. He was shading the underside of an orchid petal. A couple came next, late 20s, aesthetically coordinated in the way that suggests they had dressed for the park rather than simply in it. The woman sat down in the wildflowers. Not on the path, not on the bench, in the wildflowers. She sat down with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before and found it photographed beautifully, which it did, which is the problem, which is the entire problem, which is why we are all here today. Her partner crouched, adjusted the angle, shot from below to get the meadow behind her, and they spent 4 minutes in there while the woman arranged her dress and the man called out adjustments. Can you tilt your chin? Other way. Can you? Yeah. Can you look like you don't know I'm taking it? She looked like she knew he was taking it. The boy watched this one, not with judgment exactly, more with the patient attention of someone identifying a species he had not previously encountered in the wild. He added a line to his sketch. The couple left. They did not look at the sign on the way out. They would post the photograph that evening with the caption "Wildflower Season Cherry Blossom" and receive 247 likes. And in the comments someone would ask where this was and they would tell them. And that person would come the following weekend. And none of this is hypothetical. Here is where the afternoon changed register. The early visitors had been careless in the way that people are careless when they do not know they are doing damage, which is most damage, most of the time. What came next was different. What came next was the particular confidence of people who had considered the rules, weighed them against their own intentions, found their own intentions to be good, and concluded that the rules were therefore not applicable to them. The man with the drone arrived at 12:30. Had a case, a proper case, with foam cutouts for each component, which he opened on the bench 2 seats down from the boy with the methodical satisfaction of someone who does this regularly and considers it a skill. He assembled the drone. He read the airspace app on his phone. He confirmed he was not in a no-fly zone, which was correct, because the no-fly zone designation and the site of special scientific interest designation are administered by different bodies, and he had checked one of them. He launched the drone. It went up beautifully, clean lift, smooth hover. He walked it out over the meadow, banking left, getting altitude, framing the shot from above the way the ground simply cannot give you, and he was right about that. It was a genuinely good shot. The meadow from above in late May is a remarkable thing, and none of that is the point. The point is that a drone weighing 249 grams hovering at 4 meters above a wildflower meadow in peak pollinator season creates a shadow, and a noise, and a displacement of air. And the bees who are doing the actual work, the bees who have been doing the actual work since before Windsor Castle had walls, the bees did not enjoy any of these things. The boy looked up at the drone. Then he looked at the bees. Then he looked back at his sketchbook with the expression of someone who has already calculated how this ends. It ended with the man retrieving his drone from a hawthorn bush 20 meters downwind, where it had been deposited by a gust that appeared, to all meteorological indicators, to have come from nowhere. He packed it back into its foam cutouts. He left without making eye contact with anyone. The bees resumed their work. Next, a woman with a trowel. A trowel. She had brought a trowel to a protected wildflower meadow, and she had a carrier bag, and she had identified a clump of what she believed to be common cowslips along the inner edge, and had concluded, through a reasoning process that remains unclear, that transplanting them to her garden in Maidenhead would be good for them. "They'll have more space," she told the ranger who appeared, not from the hawthorn, a different ranger, one who had materialized from the direction of the car park, with the quiet inevitability of weather. "I've got a south-facing bed. They'd love it." The ranger explained the Wildlife and Countryside Act, 1981. The woman explained her south-facing bed. The ranger explained the act again, this time with the fine amount. The woman put the trowel away. She looked at the boy on the bench. The boy was drawing. She looked at the sign. She left. The cowslips remained. The man with the picnic arrived at 1:15. He had a proper hamper wicker, the old-fashioned kind with actual plates, and he set it up approximately 4 meters inside the meadow boundary with the assurance of a person who picnics outdoors regularly and has never been asked to stop. His wife laid out a blanket. His children received sandwiches. His dog received half a sandwich, which the dog ate and immediately wanted another. It was, in isolation, a lovely scene. It was also happening on top of a colony of yellow rattle that had taken 11 years to establish. The PPO, the man in the hawthorn, who had by now moved to a position behind a mature oak with a better sightline, did not move. This was not his department. This was the ranger's department, and the ranger was still processing the trowel woman. The boy looked at the picnic. He looked at it for a long moment, not with hunger, not with judgment, with the particular focused attention he had been giving all afternoon to things he was cataloging. Then he looked back at his orchid. He was adding the stem now, getting the angle right. The stem of a common spotted orchid curves slightly at the base, and he had noticed this, and he was drawing it correctly, which required looking at the flower and then at the page and then at the flower again. A cycle of attention that had not been broken once in 2 hours despite everything that had happened around it. The picnic family lasted 22 minutes before the second ranger arrived and explained the situation. The man with the hamper disputed it. His wife did not dispute it. His wife had read the sign on the way in and had said nothing, which is a different category of problem, and one the rangers cannot legislate. They packed up and left. The yellow rattle, 11 years in the making, was bruised but surviving. Then the woman with her own wildflower seeds arrived. Had a paper bag, seed packet paper, the expensive kind from a heritage supplier, and she had clearly done research. This was not ignorance, this was enthusiasm, this was someone who had read about wildflower meadow degradation and had decided to help. She was going to scatter seeds. Native species, she wanted the ranger to know. She had checked. Rhinanthus minor, yellow rattle, Dactylor hisafuchsii, that's the common spotted orchid, and Leucanthemum vulgare, oxeye daisy. All native, all correct. She had done her homework. The ranger was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what's already growing there?" the ranger asked. She looked at the meadow. "Rhinanthus minor," the ranger said. Dactylorhizophusciae, Leucanthemum vulgare. She looked at her bag. Introducing cultivated seed stock into an established native colony, the ranger continued, with the patience of someone who has explained this before and will explain it again, and has made peace with that. Cross-pollinates the genetics, weakens the local strain over time. What you're holding would do more damage than the man who just had his picnic in there. She looked at her bag for a long time. I just wanted to help, she said. I know, the ranger said. She left with her seeds. She did not scatter them. This was, quietly, the best outcome of the afternoon. The boy had not looked up for any of this. He was on a new page now, a different flower. He had moved on from the orchid to a small cluster of yellow rattle, the actual yellow rattle, the real plant, 4 feet from where he was sitting, and he was drawing it with the same unhurried, observational patience. At 2 o'clock, the meadow began to participate more actively in its own defense. This is not a metaphor. The bees had been present throughout, doing their work with professional disregard for the human activity around them, but there is a threshold. The threshold is specific to each bee. It is not a policy. It is not a decision. It is simply a point past which a bee that has been navigating around cargo shorts and drone shadows and picnic blankets all afternoon will conclude that enough is enough, and that the creature, currently crouching over a patch of oxeye daisies, to get a better angle deserves to know about it. The young man with the camera was fine. He had one sting on his left forearm which he would later describe to his friends as an attack, which is not what it was. What it was information. The information was, this is not your space. He received the information. He returned to the path. He rubbed his arm. The bees resumed their work. The ground, meanwhile, had its own methods. Windsor Great Park meadows are managed on a low-intervention basis, which means the ground is uneven in the way that undisturbed ground is uneven, dips, rises, small mammal runs just below the surface, the occasional root system that doesn't announce itself. The woman in the coordinated outfit who came back in the afternoon, a different woman from the morning, but operating on the same principle, which is that the meadow is a backdrop, stepped into a mammal run at the wrong angle and went down like a sack of good intentions, not hurting herself, but depositing her phone into a patch of common knapweed from which it required several minutes of careful retrieval. She did not attempt a second shot. The ranger on horseback appeared at 2:30. He had been visible on the far side of the park for most of the afternoon, a distant figure moving along the upper tree line, and most of the visitors had registered him as scenery, which is the correct response to a man on a horse in Windsor Great Park, and also, historically, a mistake. He came down the slope at a walk, not fast, not aggressive, simply directional, the horse picking its way through the uneven ground with the calm authority of an animal that has done this many times. And the effect on the 4 teenagers who had been taking turns jumping from the footpath into the meadow and back was immediate and complete. They stopped jumping. They stood very still. The horse stopped 10 feet from them. The ranger on the horse did not say anything for a long moment. "Path," he said eventually. They went to the path. He walked the horse along the boundary line at a pace that suggested he had nowhere to be and no intention of leaving, which is the equestrian equivalent of a fixed stare, and the cluster of visitors who had been considering whether to step in for a closer look reconsidered. The boy watched the horse. He watched it for a full minute, pencil still, not sketching it, just watching the way it moved, the way its weight shifted on the uneven ground, the particular angle of its head when it stopped. Then he opened to a new page. He began to draw the horse. This was when the woman with the toddler noticed the boy. She had been on the path, correctly, the entire time. She was not a violator. She had read the sign and was respecting it. She was one of the good ones. She wanted that acknowledged. and she was watching her toddler point at the flowers with the rapt enthusiasm of someone for whom all flowers are new, which they were, because he was too, and she was explaining the names to him in the low, patient voice of a good parent. "That's a daisy, sweetheart. I think that's an orchid, actually. Can you say orchid?" He could not say orchid. "And that little one, I'm not sure what that one is, actually." "Yellow rattle," said the boy on the bench, without looking up from the horse. She looked at him. He was drawing the horse. The ranger on the horse was now 50 feet away, moving along the far boundary, and the boy was drawing it from memory and inference, filling in the hindquarters with the small, confident strokes of someone who has drawn horses before. "Yellow rattle," he said again. "Rhinanthus minor. It's parasitic on the grass roots. That's why it's important it suppresses the grass so the other flowers can grow." The toddler said something that was not yellow rattle, but had approximately the right number of syllables. "It makes a rattling sound when the seeds are ripe," the boy said. "That's why it's called that. If you come back in July, you can hear it." She looked at the boy. She looked at the PPO-shaped shadow behind the oak tree. She looked back at the boy. "Are you?" she started. "His name is Nelson," the boy said. He was drawing the horse again. "The horse. He's been working this section for 6 years." She looked at the ranger on the horse, who was now at the far end of the meadow. She looked at the boy. The boy was drawing. She didn't finish the sentence she'd started. Some pennies don't need to finish dropping. You just feel the weight of them going and you understand. She picked up her toddler. She pointed at the yellow rattle. She said, "That one's called yellow rattle, sweetheart. Can you say yellow rattle?" He could not say yellow rattle, but he pointed at it very seriously with one finger. And then the moment that the afternoon had been building toward, without announcing itself, without a drum roll or a transition, simply as the next thing that happened arrived. A man in his 50s, red-faced from the walk from the car park, wearing cargo shorts with enough pockets for a significant expedition and a camera that was almost certainly more expensive than his car, came down the path, read the sign, looked at the meadow, looked at the sign again, and then turned to the boy on the bench. "Excuse me, mate," he said, in the cheerful, carrying voice of a man who has been excused every time he has asked. "Is it actually enforced, the sign? Because I've seen loads of photos taken in there." The boy looked up. He looked at the man. He looked at the man for long enough that the man's cheerful expression did a small, involuntary recalibration. "Yes," the boy said. "Right, but it's a site of special scientific interest," the boy said. "The fine is up to £2,500 under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. The orchids took 9 years to establish. There are 4 species of bee in there that are classified as priority species under the UK post-2010 biodiversity framework." The man looked at the boy. "Right," the man said. "Nelson's still on the far boundary," the boy said, looking back at his sketchbook. "If you want to know what enforcement looks like." The man looked at the ranger on the horse on the far boundary. He put his camera back in its bag. He sat down on the other bench. He did not go into the meadow. The afternoon unwound the way afternoons do in late May when the light comes down at a low angle through oak canopy, and everything goes golden and quiet. The ranger on the horse made 2 more passes along the boundary. No one stepped in for the last 90 minutes. It is impossible to say whether this was because of the horse, or the sign, or the bees, or the uneven ground, or the boy on the bench, or some combination of all of them working together in the way that a healthy ecosystem does, each element supporting the others, none of them sufficient alone. The 4 teenagers from earlier came back. They stood on the path. They looked at the meadow. They did not say anything for a while. "What's that one?" one of them asked. He was looking at the yellow rattle. The boy looked up. "Yellow rattle," he said. It sounds like a percussion instrument in July. Come back in 6 weeks. They looked at each other with the expression of people who are not sure if they're being messed with. Why? Said one of them. Because it's worth hearing, the boy said. They stood there for another minute. Then they left, and 2 of them were already arguing about whether to come back in 6 weeks, which means one of them will. The woman who'd brought the trowel came back too, not with the trowel. She walked to the sign and read it again, properly this time, all of it. And then she stood at the meadow boundary for a long while with the expression of someone revising an opinion they'd held for years. She didn't go in. She just looked. At 4:10, the boy closed his sketchbook. He looked at the meadow for a moment in the way that you look at something you've been looking at all day and are now seeing differently because the light has changed, which it had. The late afternoon light pulling everything into relief, the orchids catching it, the oxeye daisies going almost white, the yellow rattle throwing tiny shadows that made the ground look textured and alive. He put the 4B pencil into his jacket pocket. He stood up. He was small, average or slightly below, navy jumper, sleeves still pushed up, sketchbook under one arm. He walked back up the path toward the car park. The PPO fell into step behind him at a distance that looked casual and was not casual. Nobody stopped them. Nobody paid attention. A woman with a terrier stepped aside for the boy as he passed, the way you step aside for someone on a narrow path, a small automatic courtesy, and he nodded at her, and she nodded back, and that was all. The meadow remained. The common spotted orchids were 3 days from peak, which they would reach on Friday, in the absence of any further visitors, in the presence of the bees, in the presence of the yellow rattle doing its slow parasitic work on the grass roots, in the silence that a wildflower meadow makes when no one is in it. In the sketchbook, now in the back of a car moving through the park toward the castle, were 6 pages of work. Page 1. A common spotted orchid, correctly rendered, stem angle accurate. The slight curve at the base observed and drawn with a 4B pencil by a 10-year-old boy who had been taught to look before he drew, and had discovered, sometime in the last 2 hours, that looking was the whole thing. Pages 2 through 6. Oxeye daisy, yellow rattle, common knapweed. A bee on a flower head that was probably a buff-tailed bumblebee but might have been a white-tailed. The distinction being in the tail color, which was hard to see from the bench. So he had left it as a note in the margin, check species, B. terrestris or B. lucorum, and Nelson the horse, in 3/4 view from memory, getting the weight distribution right, the way the near foreleg was slightly forward. The sketchbook was a gift. Inside the front cover, in handwriting that suggested the giver was older and had been taught to write with a nib, was an inscription. It said, look at the thing itself. Then draw what you see, not what you think you should see. Pa. Pa had not been there today. Pa was frequently not there. Pa was frequently elsewhere, doing things that Pa was required to do, things that are announced and scheduled and photographed and turned into news items, things that leave very little room for an afternoon in a meadow with a 4B pencil. But Pa had given him the sketchbook. And Pa had written, look at the thing itself. And the boy had come to Windsor Great Park on a Tuesday in late May, which is the right time for orchids if you know about orchids, and he had sat on a bench at the edge of a protected wildflower meadow, and he had looked. That's the whole story. The meadow was there before he came. It will be there after. The orchids do not know who he is. The yellow rattle does not know. The bees do not know, and if they did, it would not change their work, because the bees have their own work and it does not require anything from you except your absence. The people who came today and stayed on the path, the mother with the toddler who learned what yellow rattle was, the teenagers who might come back in July, the woman who stood at the boundary and revised her opinion without anyone asking her to, those people came to see the meadow. The people who came today and stepped off the path, the photographer, the picnic family, the woman with the trowel and the good intentions, The man with the drone, those people came to take the meadow. The difference is small. The difference is everything. The boy knew which one he was. He had been sitting on the correct side of the boundary for 4 hours with a pencil and a sketchbook, taking nothing, leaving nothing, receiving everything the meadow was prepared to give to someone who stayed on the path and looked. He didn't need to be in it. He just needed to see it, which in the end is the only way to love a thing without destroying it.